This particular chapter, I am going to discuss about how the current global economy was structured, or rather, how it came to be. For example, how the global trade really was structured prior to the contemporary world. What were the influences, or what started or what triggered the current global economy. So first and foremost, before we delve into the current structure of our global economy, we have to learn about the global economy prior to the present one that we have now. So the global economic system, specifically the global capitalist system, emerged in about 1896 and reached something of a peak throughout the world by 1914. But prior to the global capitalist system that we have, the world was characterized by various developments in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Okay, so for example, in previously, or kumbaga, these were the earliest developments in transportation and communication that really helped a lot in carrying out, or in structuring our current global economy. So we're all very familiar, for example, with the um, the creation of the monster ships, and then eventually the creation of the airplanes, which actually very much made the global economy convenient, especially when it comes to global and international transactions. And then in the realm of communication, for example, of course, we have the different technologies that lets us communicate all over the globe. And then another one is we have the remittances. So remittances imply that, or refer rather to the transactions by which immigrants send money back to their country of origin. So remittances is eto, for example, uh, yung pera rather na pinapadala ng mga OFWs sa mga family nila sa Philippines, for example. So, the global economic system entails large-scale immigration, especially immigration and migration, especially with the different opportunities that are opened up all over the globe dahil sa globalization. So, as we've established, no, because of globalization, nagkaroon ng talagang super large-scale migration. And with it also, it also brought the growing importance of remittances to those na naiiwan sa kanilang homeland. So these are actually, remittances are another what do you call this? Another development in the global economy. So ito yung mga pera na pinapadala ng, for example, ng mga OFWs from other countries na nagtatrabaho sa other countries, nag-migrate sa other countries, pabalik or papunta sa families nila na naiwan sa kanilang country of origin. And then we also try to answer the question of the role, about the role rather of economic specialization and comparative advantage with regards to its contribution to the global economic development before the current period of globalization. So as I have already discussed up in the previous chapter, or briefly mentioned in the previous chapter, the law of comparative advantage pertains to the activity wherein nations concentrate on what they do best. Okay, so the global economic specialization among the nations of the world became the norm. So kumbaga, there is a specialization, something, kumbaga, at a special aspect or a special field wherein, di ba, when it comes to specialization, this is something, an aspect or a particular field wherein someone excels at. So, sa global economic specialization, it pertains to, kumbaga, the operation on the basis of the law of comparative advantage. So if we apply that to in our global economy, that means na when it comes to our economies, we should focus on the things that we specialize at, the things that we can do best, where we can do best. So for example, yun nga, my example was the Philippines as an agricultural country. So since we are an agricultural country, we should focus on our agricultural industries in enriching and developing our agricultural industries, because that would be our advantage from other countries. We should not, for example, between the Philippines and, and Japan, for example, hindi tayo pwedeng mag-focus sa pag-develop ng ating technologies because hindi yon yung ating comparative advantage. Our comparative advantage is our specialization, something where we would be excelling at, we would be the best at. So, pagdating sa context ng Philippines, that pertains to our agricultural industry. So, hindi pwede na mag-focus sa technology because wala tayong alam sa technology, wala tayong resources when it comes to our technology. Okay? So, now the question now would be focusing on the common problems experienced during globalization, particularly regarding its impact on poorer nations and certain industries. So parang, kumbaga, this played a role in the current structure of our global economy. These problems played a role as to how globalization was improved or as to how the current global economy is currently structured. So, first and foremost, the what do you call this? Different countries in the world, as I've been previously telling you, have different causes, or different countries have different problems from different causes and should have different solutions, diba? So these are some of the biggest problems due to the global economic development, for example, or especially before and after periods of globalization, or before and after the bouts of globalization. So first and foremost, poor nations and the peoples who inhabit them were and subjugated by the operations of global economy. So kasi when it comes to the global economy, especially when it comes to global trade, ganyan-ganyan, or especially when it comes to globalization, di ba? I think I've already mentioned this once. Parang even if you're a poor country, you have to keep up with what's happening with the world, especially with globalization. Okay? Kasi unless you try to keep up with how globalization faces itself, talagang mapag-iiwanan ka or wala kang makukuha from globalization. So, most of the time, yung mga poorer countries, they are subject to subjugation by the global economy. So, kumbaga, napipilitan sila na um, na sundin yung mga demands ng global economy. Okay, so subjugation means they are under the domination or under the control of something. Okay, so that means to say, in this particular situation, yung mga mahihirap na bansa are under the control of the global economy because of course they have kumbaga, they have no control over what's happening with the world, especially kapag mahirap ka, wala kang resources, you cannot really say na this is the path that you would take because wala kang choice eh. 'Di ba? Katulad na, for example, when talking about dependence theory and the world system theory, we might be wondering how else would less developed countries develop if lahat na lang ng nangyayari sa mundo, sa globalization is are really dictated by the developed countries, di ba? So it's actually a conundrum, di ba? It's a conundrum, kumbaga parang nagiging impasse na rin siya, parang nagiging dead end kasi we have no other choice but to be subjugated by the developed countries, 'di ba? Kasi otherwise wala tayong magagawa. We cannot stand on our own. That because also again, yan yung epekto ng mga pinaggagawa ng mga development theories, ng mga development project ng mga developed countries. So, ang nangyayari, nagtatambak-tambak na rin yung ating mga problems. And then second is, that not all parts of the world gain from the growth of the global economy. Because obviously, with the capitalist system, diba? With capitalism and especially with globalization, especially with the advance of technology, ganyan-ganyan, the structures of our global economy, hindi pare-parehas yung economic growth ng bawat bansa. That's why also we have developed countries and less developed countries, and then we also have the bottom billion, ganyan. So we have the phenomenon of the bottom billion today, which means the poorest of the poor or the poorest among the poor nations, 'di ba? So kung makikita natin dito, no, dito sa pyramid na ito, no, the wealth distribution previously sobrang liit lang ng mga sobrang mayayaman na tao, 'di ba? So ayan. Ayan. So makikita natin na nasa pinakababa, mas marami yung sa pinakababa, pinaka-bottom na hindi masyadong mayaman as compared doon sa mga 1% na mayayaman sa mundo. Because even though globalization, for example, or even though the global economy in the past is or the concept of development is supposed to help less developed countries, 'di ba? In reality, hindi tayo yung nagbe-benefit. Rather, ang nagbe-benefit is the developed nations lang. So, not all parts of the world gain from the growth of the global economy. So, kaya nga, very famous yung saying na the rich becomes richer, the poor becomes poorer. Because the more that they develop, the more that they improve their economies, the more na napag-iwanan yung mga mahihirap na bansa. And then third is, not only where or are there losers in this economic competition among geographic areas, but also certain industries and social classes lose out, at least in comparison to the winner. So, di ba makikita natin very, very much evident yung poverty ng poor nations, especially ng mga lower social classes, 'di ba? So in comparison to them, talagang makikita natin yung divide between the upper class and the lower class, or even the upper and the middle class. And especially if we're talking about geographic locations, no, 'di ba? Between the north and the south and etc. Okay, and then lastly, within nations, the poor tended to suffer most when those nations are forced to repay their debts to other more developed nations. So remember with the concept of structural adjustment. So let's say for example, Africa, where Africa, what do you call this? Kumbaga, ano ba to? Okay, I'm sorry. Africa, for example, which houses most of the bottom billion or the poorest among the poor nations in the world. So, di ba, I recall structural adjustment. Kapag for example, mangungutang si Africa, no, saan ba to? Kay IMF and saka kay World Bank, pag dumating yung time na, what do you call this? Pag dumating yung time na sinisingil na sila, so they have to really repay their utang. So, di ba, makikita natin with this, with this illustration, no, na parang yung developed nations, sila na nga yung sobrang yaman na bansa, sila pa yung binabayaran natin, di ba? Kasi of course, tayo yung nangungutang sa kanila. So, just like the illustration on the right side, katulad nito, I think this is also quite suitable to the Philippines, di ba? Katulad, for example, ng mga utang natin sa ibang bansa or sa international organizations, di ba? So, ang nagsasuffer talaga is yung mga poor nations kapag kailangan na nilang magbayad ng kanilang utang. So, parang, kumbaga, wala ka pa nga ginagawa, hindi ka pa nga pinapanganak, may utang ka na because of the previous utang ng previous administration or the previous ganyan-ganyan. So, katulad ng Philippines, yung utang natin abroad, international utang natin, hindi nababawasan. Bagkus, nadadagdagan pa, di ba? Yung utang natin. So, tayo yung pinakang nagsasuffer with the current setup. That's why, when it comes to neoliberalism, although it spurred the growth of developed nations, hindi siya applicable sa lahat ng bansa because again, we don't have the same problem, so we cannot have the same solutions to our problems, especially when it comes to between the developed nations and the less developed nations. So in total, the global economy of a century ago, and which could be said to be the same as today, was not equally good for everyone and was bad for many. Because, of course, no, habang nagde-develop yung developed nations, habang nag-i-enrich yung kanilang, or habang yumayaman sila, yung mga may hirap na bansa, naghihirap at naghihirap. So, wala talagang, there is no equality and there is also no equity when it came to the global economy, and which can also be said true to today's economy, di ba? So, yun siya. Now, the next question that we'll try to answer now is, what were the major events that led to the collapse of the economic globalization following the First World War, and how did countries like Italy and Germany react economically during the 1930s? And after this one, we are now going to find out how the US became a global dominant power following the Second World War. Of particular importance in the 1930s was the movement of many countries, especially fascist Italy and Germany, in the direction of autarky. Okay, so autarky is the turn inward of a nation in order to create as much economic self-sufficiency as possible. Actually, autarky is quite like the anathema of globalization. Because when we're talking about globalization, it pertains to the turn outward of nation states, meaning to say, opening up of nation states, especially their economy, towards the global arena. Well, in autarky, no, this is the turn inward, meaning to say, this is the tendency of nation states to economically, what do you call this? To economically close itself from other nation states, especially with regards to the international arena, the global trade, etc., in order for them to become economically self-sufficient. Meaning to say, in order for them, parang to prove that they are economically self-sufficient, meaning to say they can sustain themselves without help from the global trade or the international trade, or without the help from outward sources. So as you can see from this illustration, no, autarky suggests no aid, meaning to say walang help na pumapasok from other countries towards that particular country. There are no imports, meaning to say they do not receive or they do not buy imports from other countries, and they also do not export products. So in other words, it is a closed economy, meaning to say their economy is closed from other countries. Kumbaga, they do not particularly partake in what they call this, in global trade. So this was the practice in 1930s, particularly of Italy and Germany. And remember that during this time, US was not yet the global hegemon, global dominant power in the world. Okay, so the global dominant powers in the world belonged to the European continent, so particularly European countries. So ito yung naging practice nila during this time. So they closed their economy from other economies from outside sources. And also, during this particular time, US had a tendency towards isolationism. So actually, autarky and isolationism are the same in the sense that both of them are a turn inward, okay, to what do you call this? A uh, um, turn inward in order to achieve, kumbaga, no. Autarky and isolationism's similarities end in the fact that both of them are inward turns of nation states. Pero hindi sila magkaparehas because autarky pertains to economic self-sufficiency or pertains to the economy, while isolationism is a political policy. So the United States of America had a tendency in 1930s towards isolationism, meaning to say being politically closed. Okay, so the United States isolated itself from other countries for a very long time, but it only became known after the Second World War. That is why hindi pa siya global dominant or the global hegemon during this particular time. So we might be wondering now kailan naman na naging known ang US in the global economic arena, 'di ba? So our next question or our next concern right now is the motivations behind the planning for a more open international economy after the Second World War. Okay? What were the concerns? What were the reasons for a more open international economy? Kasi remember, no, the practice during that time ay pagiging economically closed ng mga European countries. So the global economy or the international economy that time was hindi open. Kumbaga, wala pang free trade or walang free market or etc. etc. Okay, so in the midst of the Second World War, the Western world, especially the United States and the Great Britain, began planning for a more open international arena or international economy. Pero bakit nga ba sila nagpaplano na i-open nila yung international economy? Okay? So first or foremost, here are their fears. So una, they fear for the recurrence or the repeat appearance of the depression after the end of the Second World War, especially because of the difficulties those societies would have in absorbing a massive manpower created by the demobilization of the military when the war ended. So um, natatakot sila, they started planning for a more open economy because natatakot sila na maulit yung nangyaring depression after the Second World War. Especially since after the war, 'di ba? Especially after the war, kapag ka hindi na gumagamit ng military troops, so of course, this military manpower ay mag-assimilate na ulit sa society, magiging civilians na sila ulit. So there's a fear na kumbaga hindi ma-absorb yung manpower ng mga taong ito na bumalik sa bansa nila after ng war na ito. So aside from that, the fear for depression. Okay? And then another one is the fear of the resurrection of barriers to trade and the free flow of money that have become commonplace prior to World War II. So they're also fearing na magkakaroon na naman ng closed global trade. 'Di ba? Like for example, yun nga, when it comes to autarky, hindi pinapayagan yung mga exporting and importing of products. Okay? So natatakot sila na bumalik ulit yung mga barriers to global trade at saka yung mga barriers to the free flow of money. So that's why the United States of America and the Great Britain started planning for a more open economic system. So, in July 1944, at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, in the United States of America, a meeting was held which led to the beginning or the creation of yung tinatawag natin na Bretton Woods system. So, ano nga ba itong Bretton Woods system? So the Bretton Woods system is a global economic system, okay, that came out of that particular meeting because of the fear of the recurrence of the depression, and second, of the fear of the recurrence of the barriers to trade, and other other reasons for what do you call this? Other reasons for the creation of this system is Also because of the lack of cooperation between countries, for example, and the propensity of nation states to devalue their currencies in order to gain what you call this advantage in global trade, which made exchange rate wars among nation states very much possible. So because of the lack of cooperation among nation states, natatakot sila na ulit yung depression. So that's why the Bretton Woods system came out of the meeting at the Bretton Woods, what do you call this? Um, Meeting in 1944 sa USA. So these are the five elements of the Bretton Woods system. First and foremost, each participating state would establish a par value for its currency expressed in terms of gold or equivalently in terms of the gold value of the US dollar as of July 1944. Second, the official monetary authority in each country, like for example, in the case of the Philippines, that would be the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, would agree to exchange its own currency for those of other countries at the established exchange rates plus or minus a 1% margin. Third, the International Monetary Fund was created to establish, stabilize, and oversee exchange rates. Fourth, the member states agreed to eliminate, at least eventually, all restrictions on the use of its currency for international trade. And lastly, the entire system was based on the US dollar. So now, dito natin makikita yung pag-emerge ng United States of America as as a global dominant power. It really basically started with the economic problems of the world. Paano nga ba siya naging global dominant power? Through the Bretton Woods system or through this particular dilemma. Okay. First and foremost, the Bretton Woods system was entirely based on the US dollar. Bakit? Because after the Second World War, di ba, remember, prior to the Second World War, prior to the dominance of the United States of America, the most dominant powers in the world were European powers, the European countries. Kasi si US, they have a tendency to isolate themselves politically. So hindi pa sila talagang ganong kakilala sa mundo. Pero when the depression came, especially after the Second World War, even the most powerful countries in the world ay nalugmok sa kahirapan, economically speaking. So even the European countries who were the wealthiest countries during that time, nalugmok sa kahirapan. And during what do you call this? During the planning for the Bretton Woods system or during that particular meeting, parang kumbaga, in layman's term, the only man standing, global economically speaking, was the US. Okay? So si US lang that time yung kumbaga merong power to help the rest of the world recover from the Second World War. Kaya this particular system was based on the US dollar. Okay? So the Bretton Woods system was entirely based on the US dollar. Yung US dollar yung ginawang basis ng currency for the exchange rate ng buong mundo. Why? Because during that particular time, si US dollar owned 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. Okay? The rest of the world's gold reserves depleted, pero si US dollar nagre-remain yung 2/3 ownership niya sa gold reserves ng mundo. Kaya the system was based on the US dollar, and the first element of this system is establishing a par value for the currency expressed in terms of gold. So, kung baga, for example, sa Philippine peso, meron siyang, Meron siyang, ano ba to? Meron siyang equivalent, okay? Equivalent na, kumbaga, weight in terms of gold. So, parang, for example, 100 pesos is equal to this particular ounce of gold, then i-convert na naman yun siya sa US dollar. So yun yung nagiging par value ng mga currency ng what do you call this? Ng currency during that time. Kasi what they're trying to do is parang not particularly balance the financial order or the monetary order, pero magkaroon ng semblance of order when it came to the monetary order and financial order ng mundo. Kasi as evidenced by what's happened before this time, no, there was no cooperation between nation states. So uh, what we call this, yung ginagawa nila noon, ina-undervalue nila yung currency nila para, for example, mas maibenta nila yung mga products nila, mas mai-export nila, and ganyan-ganyan. So, ang nangyayari, nagkakalugian ng mga pera yung mga countries kasi dinidevalue nila. So, in order for that to not happen again, no, ginawang basis yung US dollar dahil sa gold reserves nila ay nagkaroon ng establishment of par value equivalent to ounces of gold and in terms of the global value of the US dollar in July 1944. Second element is that kailangan mag-agree ng kanilang mga monetary authority in the exchanging of the currency ng kanilang currency with the currency sa other countries. Okay? Third one, out of the Bretton Woods system, dito nag-create din also yung International Monetary Fund. Okay? So, International Monetary Fund is the brainchild of the Bretton Woods system. So, the International Monetary Fund was created to establish, to stabilize, and to oversee exchange rates. So meaning to say, si International Monetary Fund yung naatasan na mag-monitor, mag-regulate ng mga exchange rates. Kailangan niyang i-monitor na yung exchange rate, for example, ng European countries or ng European currencies is hindi sobrang mataas or hindi sobrang mababa. Yung exchange rate, for example, ng Asian countries, hindi masyadong nade-devalue yung kanilang pera. Okay? Para magkaroon ng monetary order and financial order sa global economy. Fourth one is they would they would agree to eliminate restrictions in the use of its currency for international trade. Okay? So siguro this would pave the way to a freer market and a freer global trade. So ito yung five elements ng Bretton Woods system that tried to help the global order, especially when it comes to monetary and financial order of the world. So, yung pinaka-powerful na effects also ng Bretton Woods system was felt in global trade, especially when it comes to importing and exporting products. In the global monetary order, yes, because they were able to establish, especially when it comes to exchange rates, no? They were able to establish order for the global monetary and financial order of the world. And third is sa global investment, because in this particular instance, no, it made it possible for global investments to flow all over the globe. Kasi of course na-eliminate na rin yung ibang restrictions with the use of the currency, nagkaroon ng monetary order, so naging possible na yung exchange of investments. Pero with the powerful effects that the Bretton Woods system had on, for example, global trade, monetary order, and global investment, okay? So with the global openness that was brought about by the Bretton Woods system, it contributed actually to the emergence or to the expansion of social welfare programs, which, if you can remember, is discouraged or minimized by a neoliberal state. But we have to remember na the Bretton Woods system was actually curated to help the recovery of the global economy. So, kumbaga, hindi pa dito talagang pumapasok yung pag-insert nila ng neoliberal doctrines. Okay? So, yung nag-benefit rin yung mga welfare states, especially in dealing with various problems, and especially in the creation of social safety net programs para ma-protect nila yung kanilang nations at saka yung kanilang citizens. So, in the process, binigyan nila yung mga nations, yung mga countries, and yung mga entrepreneurs ng cover para maging involved sila sa global marketplace. Now, our next concern right now is regarding the the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, yung tinatawag natin na GATT. Ano yung GATT? Ano yung World Trade Organization? At saka ano yung functions ng World Trade Organization? Or how are GATT and WTO different and paano ito nag-evolve? Okay? So GATT, or the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, was a system for the liberalization of trade that grew out of the Bretton Woods system and came into existence in 1947 and lasted until 1995. Okay, so it lasted until 1995 because it was superseded by the World Trade Organization. It was replaced by the World Trade Organization. Dahil yung GATT, or General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, is limited only on trade in goods, meaning to say yung mga products na ini-export at saka ini-import. While WTO is more inclusive because it also took on the responsibility for increasingly important trade in services, like for example, human services, etc., etc. Okay, so the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade um, was created to liberalize trade, meaning to say to remove or lessen the restrictions on global trade. But you can observe here that it came into existence out of the Bretton Woods system because the Bretton Woods system was created in 1944 and lasted until 1995, long after the Bretton Woods system was already dead. Okay, so kasi yung sa General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, diyan nagkakaroon ng tinatawag na rounds or kumbaga meetings between countries to decide, for example, on tariffs, for example, or on how to liberalize trade, on how to free the global trade or lessen the restrictions on global trade. Now, with the end of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and with its replacement with the World Trade Organization, mas naging open pa yung discussions regarding tariffs or tariff-related barrier. Kasi sa World Trade Organization, it also included non-tariff related barriers, meaning to say parang non-tax related barriers, especially in trading of goods. And it also involved dealing with problems, not only focusing in the trading of goods, but again, in the trading of services. So non-tariff barriers, for example, yung mga quota, for example, national subsidies, and etc. and etc. Okay, so out of the World Trade Organization, okay, so meron ding dalawang very important agreements from this organization that are non-tariff related or not out of trade in goods, for example. Okay, so first is we have the TRIPS, or the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, or TRIPS. Okay, so more recently, attention has shifted to such issues as international trade in services, trade-related in international property rights, and trade-related investment measures. So this involves intangible ideas, knowledge, and expressions that require their use to be approved by their owner. So involved here, diba? So the WTO agreement, this is the World Trade Organization's agreement to protect the interests of those that create ideas. So involved here is a wide range of intellectual property rights, such as movies, books, mga patents, mga trademarks, inventions, music recordings, computer software, etong sa mga, when it comes to medicines, mga patents, etc., which exists or whose values lie largely in the realm of ideas. So I think most of you are very familiar with the ongoing, with the issue regarding Lenka and Shaira, diba? So this is actually an example of that is actually an example of that particular incidents where TRIPS protect the interest of Lenka because siya yung original may-ari noong song, for example, or nung lyrics, I don't know, but siya yung merong copyright noong kanta na yun, ng tune na yun, ng music na yun. That's why hindi pwede na basta-basta nakawin yung mga ideas especially if they are protected under TRIPS, if they are copyrighted, if they are trademarked, if they are licensed, if they are patented, and etc., etc. So that came to be because of the World Trade Organization. Okay. Another one is actually, no, the copy that we have of the book, George Ritzer's book on globalization, yung itong meron tayo na ginagamit natin, actually, kadalasan sa mga libro na ito, or especially may mga intellectual ideas, ganyan-ganyan, mga libro, articles, journals, encyclopedias, and whatever, they're actually, una, di ba, we're familiar of piracy, meaning to say, yung i-reproduce mo yung libro, for example, or yung media, for example, without the knowledge or without the approval of the owner. So, yung mga libro, actually, hindi siya pwedeng i-photocopy, ganyan, hindi siya pwedeng i-reproduce ulit, especially if bulk, without royalty for the author na may-ari ng idea, original idea, and hindi rin siya pwedeng i-reproduce digitally through the ebook, for example, di ba? But since we are puritas, no? We are purita, we are the third world country, we are less developed, ganyan, dito nagpa-play out yung digital divide ng mga countries because there are instances wherein people cannot really afford to like buy the original book kasi for your information, the original book na ginagamit natin, yung original copy nito, it would cost more or less 4,000 pesos per copy. So since kapag ginagamit na yan ng mga less developed countries, hindi nila ma-afford, ang other choice natin is either to photocopy the entire book or to download a pirated or an illegal copy of the book through ebooks, via ebooks, ganyan, because of the digital divide that we are experiencing. Okay, so basically we are in violation of the TRIPS or this particular agreement. But that is because, di ba? Kaya nga babalik at babalik tayo doon sa one size fits all is not the solution, um, is not the solution to all the problems, economic problems of the world. Kasi hindi pwede na pare-parehas ng solution ng lahat ng problema natin because magkakaiba tayo ng pinanggalingan ng problema. Okay? And then we also have what we call the TRIMS. So this is the TRIPS, trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. And then next, we have the TRIMS. Okay, so the TRIMS refer to the trade-related investment measures. Okay, so like how much of a foreign producer's output must be exported. Okay, a range of operating or performance measures that whose country governments impose on foreign firms to keep them from having a distorting effect on trade in goods and services. So for example, ito sa ownership of equity restrictions, ownership of shares in a company, joint venture, what do you call this? Joint venture requirements, for example, or ownership of a company in, for example, in the Philippines, or ownership of, what do you call this? Properties in a particular country, ganyan. Yung mga ini-invest ng mga foreigners sa isang activity, sa isang output, sa isang bansa para hindi niya masyadong ma-distort yung kumbaga the local economy and the trade of that particular country. So it also involves performance requirements for this particular agreement. Okay? So mga sourcing and etc. etc. Now, despite the many contributions of the World Trade Organization and despite the organization encompassing much of the GATS mandate, ano pa yung mga kumbaga criticisms against the World Trade Organization? Okay, so first and foremost, I've seen this in your definition of terms. No? One of the most controversial strains between nations in the World Trade Organization is yung tinatawag ninyo na green room. Okay? Meetings of the larger trading powers in the so-called green room and the exclusion of smaller powers from these meetings. Okay? Yung green room kasi, ito yung kumbaga parang yung mga under the table or no, these are yung green room, yung kumbaga this is a figurative room wherein the more powerful nations are meeting, okay? Tapos in-exclude nila yung mga smaller nations. So you have, for example, the United States of America, you have the European Union, Canada, and Japan, for example. So parang ito yung isa sa pinakamalaking criticism talaga sa World Trade Organization na parang kumbaga the goal is to help countries ganyan-ganyan sa trading, pero bakit nagkakaroon ng closed door meeting itong mga more powerful organization nations and in-exclude yung mga maliliit na nation, for example katulad ng Haiti, for example. And second, there is no mechanism for the involvement of international non-governmental organizations in the decision making. Okay, kasi I don't know, because they are not nation states, because they are merely organizations. So parang walang representation yung mga international NGOs natin. That's why the World Trade Organization is heavily criticized by many. So it's criticized for not going far enough in countering the trade barriers retained by developed countries in domains such as agricultural products and some services. Okay, so all in all, the World Trade Organization operations are premised on the neoliberal idea that all nations benefit from free and open trade, and it is dedicated to reducing and ultimately eliminating barriers to such trade. So dito na pumapasok yung mga neoliberal ideas ng free market, deregulation of the market, and lesser state intervention of the market. Okay, so let us move on to the International Monetary Fund. Okay, so the International Monetary Fund, as we've known previously from the Bretton Woods system, was created to stabilize and oversee the exchange rate. So yan talaga yung pinaka-reason for the creation, for the birth of the International Monetary Fund. So first, it promoted the international monetary cooperation, the promotion of the exchange stability and orderly exchange arrangements, the fostering of growth and high levels of employment, and to provide temporary financial assistance to countries to help ease balance of payments adjustment. Okay? Kasi ano tayo mga tinatawag na balance of payments pertaining to global trade, mga imports and exports. So parang kumbaga, pag nakikita nila na parang nalulugmok na yung isang country kasi wala ng balance of payments, masyadong nalulugi sa global trade, pwede silang mag-provide ng temporary financial assistance sa mga countries na ito. So these are the original reasons for the creation of the International Monetary Fund. So naka-focus talaga siya sa stability ng monetary order, sa exchange rate, etc., etc., that came out of the Bretton Woods system. Okay? So how then did the role of the IMF change in the 1970s compared to its initial functions after ng kanyang establishment? So following the transition in the early 1970s from fixed to floating exchange rates, the function of the IMF was significantly transformed. So remember, one of its initial functions was to lend money for the balance of payments temporarily. Okay? Now, the IMF increasingly focused on lending to the developing world. A particular concern of the IMF was to prevent financial crises such as in Mexico in 1982, in East Asia in 1997 to 98, and in Russia in 1998 from spreading and threatening the entire global financial and currency system. But we have to note, no, the years that are written here, okay? Because during these years, in around 1970s, yung mga bansa, yung mga countries na nalugmok sa kahirapan after ng Second World War were basically able to recover na from their economic problems. So kaya nga nagkaroon ng adjustment, transformation yung function ng IMF because basically nagkaroon na ng established monetary order, and etc. So, nag-transform yung function ng IMF towards lending to the developing world. Um, what do you call this? To the developing world ng mga pera to help with their economic crisis, for example. And with it also, dito na nagsimula yung what's this? Dito na nagsimula yung pag-introduce nila ng mga conditionalities, yung structural adjustments. Okay? So dito na nag-start yung structural adjustments, which state na in order for you to borrow money from the IMF and the World Bank, kailangan ninyong sundin yung mga conditionalities namin, kailangan ninyong i-restructure yung inyong economy towards a more neoliberal economy. So, yung removal of barriers, yung liberalization of the banking system, the reduction of government spending, and privatization of what do you call this? Privatization of assets. So, these are the examples of structural adjustments from the IMF. So, pagkakat ng public spending, as we've mentioned sa neoliberal state, removal of price controls since free market. So, the market should be determined by private markets or private individuals. Freezing of wages, emphasis on production for export, import liberalization, incentives for foreign investment, privatization of public sector services, widening of inequalities. Ito naman yung mga impacts na, no? Widening of inequalities, reduced purchasing power for the poor, downsizing of public sector users, paying healthcare. So, nagkakaroon talaga ng widening of inequalities because of the fact na hindi lahat pwedeng mag-restructure ng kanilang economy. Because again, paulit-ulit, hindi one size fits all yung solution sa problems nila. Okay, and then moving on, we also have the World Bank. So it was established, again, katulad ng IMF, is also a brainchild of the Bretton Woods system. So it was established in 1944 also and began operations in 1946. So the membership is open to all member states of the IMF, and as of the writing of this particular book, it includes 184 nations. So ano yung primary functions ng World Bank? So it provides funds to government-sponsored or government-guaranteed programs in so-called Part 2 countries. So itong mga Part 2 countries are member states that are middle income or credit-worthy poorer nations. So ito yung mga countries na mahihirap pero maganda yung kanilang credit score. So meaning to say, pag sinabing maganda yung credit score mo, parang you can be trusted to utang a particular amount kasi alam nila na babayaran mo. Okay? So, provides funds to government-sponsored or guaranteed programs in Part 2 countries. And it also provides advice and analytical services to such states. Okay? What do you call this? The World Bank was initially or is officially known as the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. It is also a specialized agency of the United Nations. Okay? So, yung initial, ano ba to? Yung initial, what's this? Yung initial function niya in providing funds or pagpapautang nito sa mga member states is para doon sa mga projects that involve physical infrastructures that are capable of generating income. So for example, yung mga projects ng Part 2 countries for their transportation or communications or telecommunication, technological projects, ganyan-ganyan, na pwedeng maka-generate ng income, kumbaga mga income generating projects. Doon sila nagpapautang ng pera sa mga Part 2 countries. Pag kailangan nila yon para doon sa mga project nila. So kung for example, if Philippines is a Part 2 country, kailangan niya ng pera, kailangan niyang mangutang para mapagpatuloy yung transportation project niya, saka magpapautang si World Bank. But as time evolved, no, nag-evolve din yung what do you call this? Nag-evolve din yung purpose or yung lending abilities ng World Bank. So it also now included issues or pagpapautang regarding issues ng population, education, health, security, environment, culture, and etc. Poverty alleviation. So kapag kailangan ng pera to alleviate poverty, pwede nang mangutang ngayon kay World Bank. Hindi na kailangan ng kondisyon na kailangan income generating yung project na paggagamitan mo nung perang uutangin mo kay World Bank. Okay? So, initially, it mainly supported large infrastructure projects, but after 1968, it shifted towards projects dealing with basic needs. So, ganun nga yung sa poverty alleviation, uh, and what were perceived as underlying causes of poverty, and it drove the bank into areas such as population control, education, and human rights. Okay, so what are some of the criticisms leveled against the World Bank? So first and foremost, the bank is seen as dominated by rich, developed countries, as is the same with the what do you call this? The International Monetary Bank also. There are concerns that the banks serve certain interests and thereby adversely affect those of others. So katulad rin to sa Green Room, for example. They have the tendency to serve the interests of only those rich countries or developed countries. And having lost its focus, encroaching on the activities of other agencies. Kasi di ba, originally, the initial function of the World Bank is for the physical infrastructures, but since it shifted its focus to basic needs, na parang naapakan niya yung activities para sa ibang agency dapat. Okay? And then, lastly, no, nag-end rin, of course, yung Bretton Woods system. So, the Bretton Woods system came to an end or died in, what do you call this? In 1971 rather. In 1971, after its 27th birthday, it was very dramatic yung announcement ng end of the Bretton Woods system. Okay, so the end of the Bretton Woods system occurred when President Richard Nixon took the U.S. off the gold standard on August 15, 1971, leading to the system's demise and the devaluation of the dollar. One of the reasons is yun nga, inalis ni President Nixon ang ang US rather sa gold standard kasi nagkaroon kasi ng impact yung pagiging basis ng US dollar sa Bretton Woods system. So nagkaroon ng devaluation of the dollar as an effect, as a consequence of being the basis for that entire system. So nalugi yung US dollar dahil din sa system. And another reason, siguro the biggest reason is, di ba, going back to the initial purpose for the creation of the Bretton Woods system is to help countries recover from economic devastation after the Second World War. In 1971 also, or 1970s, naka-recover na yung mga economy ng iba't ibang bansa. Yung economy ng European countries, yung economy ng Japan, for example, ganyan, naka-recover na sila. So, kung baga, hindi na nila kailangan yung US dollar as a standard for currency, although na-maintain yung monetary order out of the Bretton Woods system because we still have the International Monetary Fund and we also have still have the the World Bank, and we still have the World Trade Organization. Okay, so the Bretton Woods system died because the President Nixon took the US off the gold standard, and because countries or economies were finally able to recover from the devastation of the the Second World War. Okay, so that would be all for the Bretton Woods system. Okay, so let's move on now to the critics for what do you call this, Bretton Woods era organizations, other organizations of our time, and the multinational corporations. Okay, so the most what do you call this? The most famous critic to the Bretton Woods era organizations, meaning to say, yung mga organizations that came to existence because of the Bretton Woods system, is example the World Trade Organization, not particularly the WTO, the IMF at saka ng World Bank, came from actually Joseph Stiglitz, no? So one of the critics is that the World Bank has been loaning to middle income countries. Diba supposedly, it should be loaning to poor countries, part 2 countries, yung poor countries na may magandang credit score. Diba? So, the World Bank now has begun loaning large sums of money to countries whose economies did not need those loans. So, instead of, for example, helping part 2 countries, nagpapautang na lang daw sila sa middle income countries na hindi naman talagang kailangan yung perang inuutang nila. So, it's hard to see what good the World Bank has done anywhere, mainly because of the first, the issue of leadership in those organizations. So World Bank and IMF, because of course, um, what do you call this? It is led by powerful countries. Kaya nga, dito nga nagsimula yung dominance ng United States of America, dominance of the US. Okay? So, yung US dominance, because of its, kumbaga, its dominance na, nagkaroon ng controversy around pag-lessen ng contribution ni US sa kanyang contribution na sa pag-contribute ng pera dito sa mga organizations na ito, 'di ba? In comparison to other nations, because siguro naging ano ba 'to? Naging complacent sila because they have become the global economically global dominance of the world. Okay, so another what do you call this? Another barrier by critics by Joseph Stiglitz include the removal barrier to free trade and the closer integration of national economies, di ba? Management of international trade agreements, the elimination of trade barriers while maintaining its own barriers to trade. So this is very ironic, di ba? Kasi the goal is to eliminate trade, pero the Western countries, the European, American ones are maintaining its own barriers to trade, di ba? So very mga hypocrite kasi sila. Pressure developing countries to expand economically. So dito papasok yung mga neoliberal doctrines na pinipilit nilang ipa-adapt sa other countries. Neoliberalism resulting to the Washington Consensus. Lastly, because globalization has not delivered on its promise of global economic stability. And then we also have that that the IMF became imperialistic. The IMF failed in terms of providing funds to countries to create greater global economic stability. Na-create din yung tinatawag natin na global governance without global government, because global governance without global government is pinangungunahan ito ng United States of America and other Western countries, and the lack of transparency in these institutions, in these organizations. So again, they are very much heavily criticized technically because of their one size fits all policy, di ba? So kung makikita ninyo dito sa illustration, ganito nagwo-work yung one size fits all. Like for example, this box is intended for cats. Tapos ipipilit mo ipapasok yung tao na hindi naman magkakasya. Ganyan. So, yan yung one size fits all approach or policy ng Western countries, ng neoliberalism, na hindi dapat, what do you call this, na hindi dapat pinapagawa or hindi dapat ina-apply sa other countries. Okay, so it also tended to ignore the inputs from the countries it was helping, and the countries that were ignored had little recourse, they had little options because they needed the funds that the IMF was offering in exchange for structural changes and reform. So sabi ko nga, no, at di ba, parang kumaga the problem pre the Bretton Woods era persisted, yung pagsasubjugate nila sa poorer countries, because wala silang choice. Katulad for example ng Philippines, walang choice kundi umutang from these countries, and wala silang choice but to deregulate their countries kasi kailangan nila ng pera. Sabi nga din doon ni paring Gunder Frank, no, the reason is capitalism talaga, or the reason is yung capitalism or neoliberalism, etc. Kasi ini-insist nila na ito yung solution sa lahat ng problems nila. Okay? Then we also have different organizations that came to existence after ng Bretton Woods system because finally these countries, especially makikita ninyo mga European countries ito, were able to financially recover from the devastations of the Second World War. So we have first the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So ito yung kumbaga, ito yung organization, yung elite organization na ito, 'di ba? Club of the richest countries. Okay? So while they have little formal power, they are highly influential. So OECD is the organization for the richest, siguro, no? The richest countries of the world. So if we have the bottom billion, a collection of the poorest of the poor, we also have the OECD, the most elitist organization in the globe, siguro. Then second, we have the European Union. So the European Union, okay, so ito yung organization naman ng European countries na gumagamit also na gumagamit rin ng sarili nilang ng uniform nila na what's this? Uniform nila na currency, which is the euro, of course, the euro. Yung euro yung currency nila. And then, yung tawag natin doon sa mga countries what do you call this, na gumagamit ng euro as their basic currency, or the zone, or their location is what do you call this, the eurozone. Okay, so it is believed to have led to an increase in prices and have depressed economic growth. Well, in the case of these European nations or the European Union. Okay, then we also have the Mercosur, which is called the Southern Common Market. Okay, so dito naman ito sa South America. So this includes Latin countries or Latin countries, Southern America. So sa Mexico, for example, and other countries in South of America. Okay, and then we also have the NAFTA. This should be North American, ha? Please do not be mistaken. This is North American Free Trade Agreement. So this involves the US, Canada, and Mexico. Okay, so for the elimination of the barriers to their trade and investment. Okay, so kasi Canada is a European country, di ba? Canada is a European country, but it forms part of the ano ba tong tawag dito? It forms part of the North African continent, di ba? Kasi for example, di ba, ito dito si North Africa, and then dito si Africa, rather South America. North America, then this is South America. Dito naman si Canada. Okay? So basically kasi Canada is not part of America kasi it's part of Europe, 'di ba? Then ito si North America, then nandito si Mexico. Okay? So the NAFTA is the trade agreement between Mexico, North America, and Canada to eliminate trade barriers between the three. Okay? Para mas madali, mas mabilis yung kanilang pagta-trade with each other. Okay? And then we also have OPEC. Okay, so OPEC is the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries. So it included major oil exporters such as Iran, Iraq. So basically sa Middle East ito siya. Karamihan is sa Middle East. So yung mga nagpo-produce ng mga petroleum or ng oil producing countries, yung mga ginagamit panggaas natin, and etc. etc. Okay? And then lastly, we have the multinational corporations. So recall, multinational corporations are corporations that operate in more than 2 countries. So, okay. So siguro this particular statement can explain why MNCs today are considered more powerful than the nation states, diba? An MNC is a firm that has the power to coordinate and control operations even if it does not own them. Because sa MNC kasi, it doesn't always mean na kailangan pagmamay-ari mo yung corporation sa other countries. Pwedeng meron ka lang shares, meron ka lang equities or stocks para maka-exercise ng control in that particular area. The MNCs, please disregard the Paki-disregard yung apostrophe dito. MNCs account for about 1/10 of the world's gross national product and about 1/3 of the world's total exports. So, 'di ba? Sobra silang very powerful sila when it comes to global trade. MNC activity is measured by foreign direct investment. Okay, so yung activity nila is measured by foreign direct investment. So, yung mga in-invest ng mga nation states as of firms in other nation states with the intent to control them. More than 2/3 of the world's FDI is directed towards developed countries. Yung mga FDI, mga invention, investment to other country. Okay, and then another form of MNC activity is actually portfolio investment. So, kung sa FDI, they purchase equities or they invest for the purpose of controlling the other company, for example. Dito naman sa portfolio investment, the purchase is for financial gain only, not to control the country or that company. Okay, portfolio investment. So we have two measures of MNC activity. We have the FDI, and second we have the portfolio investment. Okay, so MNCs are believed to be more powerful than that of the nation state because they are increasingly important in the global scene thanks to the globalization process. Now, here are the ways on becoming transnational or multinational. So parang itong tatlong ito, these are paano nagiging what you call this, multinational or transnational yung mga corporations na ito. So first we have the greenfield investment. Okay, so the greenfield investment requires or involves the building of totally new facilities in another country. Okay, so greenfield investment, so kapag ka, for example, magpapatayo ka ng bagong company doon sa other country, tinatawag yan siya ng greenfield investment. Okay? And then second, we have merger and acquisition. Okay? So merger and acquisition, I think you are quite familiar with this one. Merger and acquisition, ito yung mga nakikita natin sa mga palabas, mga TV dramas or movies wherein two companies would merge, meaning to say parang they would be married with each other. So merger pa lang yun ha, merger. So magkakaroon, kumbaga, yung pangalan ng company is the Breton company, for example, would be, kumbaga, for example, the Breton company would be merging with the Woods company. So ang ending, ang tawag sa kanila, it would be the Bretton Woods company, for example, or companies, ganyan, magkakaroon ng merger. And kadalasan rin, or sometimes mergers can lead to total acquisition. So for example, nag-merge yung dalawang nag-merge yung dalawang companies. Sometimes it can result to acquisition of the other company by one company. So for example, okay, I'm sorry. For example, ito si company A, okay? Nag-merge sila with company B. Okay? So nag-merge sila, ganyan. So they share the burdens of both their companies. So if there comes a time na, for example, si company A is na bankrupt, for example, pwedeng company B would buy out company A. So that would result to company B acquiring company A na. So magiging siya na yung sole owner ng company A and hindi na siya magiging merger. Kumbaga, na-acquire na niya both of these companies. Okay? And then, lastly, we have strategic collaboration. So strategic collaborations naman, these are harmless, what do you call this? These are siguro harmless collaborations or cooperations between companies or multiple companies. So mga collaboration lang, magkakaroon sila ng cooperation for particular activities, etc., etc. So they can share the risks, the costs, the benefits of that particular industry or factory or whatever. Okay, so what do you think are the reasons why these companies choose to be transnational or multinational? Bakit sila hindi makontento na national companies lang? Aside from the economic nature of capitalism leading them to seek out distant geographic areas. So actually, there are reasons outside doon sa kagustuhan nila, ambition nila to profit more and to expand their economies. One of the what's this? One of the most common reason kung bakit sila nag-expand sa other countries pertain to political regulations, mga market restrictions. So because of political regulations, like for example, yung mga tariff na pinapataw sa mga sa global trade, sa exports and imports, nagkakaroon ng restriction sa operation ng mga companies na ito. So instead, for example, that instead of exporting, for example, instead of exporting, I'm sorry, instead of exporting the quantity of, for example, 1,000 products na gusto lang i-export sa isang bansa, since meron tayong mga political regulations, kumbaga may mga quota or may mga tariff, nalilimit yung kanilang ability to export or to operate their own production or exportation of products. So instead of 1,000 na quantity, it would be reduced to 500 quantities only. So since they feel na parang nasusuffocate sila, nare-restrict yung kanilang operations, ang ginagawa nila is nagpapatayo sila, for example, ng new facilities, greenfield investment sa other countries para mas maging freer yung kanilang operations sa other countries na walang nagre-restrict, for example, walang restrictions, or magbabay sila ng shares para doon sila nag-ooperate. And another one is sometimes there are cultural reasons. For example, cultural reasons or cultural restrictions. So parang there are instances kasi na companies would like to ano ba to? Produce some things or some products pero hindi niya pwedeng i-produce kasi culturally restricted, nire-restrict ng kanyang bansa. So hindi siya parang in order to be culturally sensitive, hindi siya pwedeng i-produce ng isang bansa, for example. So ang gagawin niya, maghahanap siya ng other avenues, another way to produce yung gusto niyang i-produce na what's this? Product in another location, in another country. That's why they become multi or transnational corporations. Okay? And then, lastly, okay, so last issue na natin ito, we have the myth of economic globalization. Okay, so at the end of this lecture, it would ask us to think about the reality or the myth of economic globalization. Because accordingly, no, economic globalization daw is a myth. Meaning to say, pag sinabi natin na myth, hindi siya totoo. It's just a haka-haka or it's just a legend. Parang economic globalization daw is hindi totoong nangyayari, hindi totoong mayroong economic globalization. Why? Because, ang sabi nila, the current world economy may well be less open than the world economy during the period from 1870 to 1914. Remember, globalization is an epoch of increased openness and simultaneously an era of growing restrictions. Diba? So sabi nila dito, parang walang pinagkaiba yung ngayon at saka noon na world economy. Kasi sabi pa nga nila, mas restricted parang ngayon with globalization, especially with the restrictions na pinapatupad, ginagawa ng mga countries kesa noon, di ba? There does not appear to be much in the way of movement toward the development of multinational businesses. And there is no massive shift of investment and employment from advanced to developing countries because they believe that the investments only circulate within advanced countries, developed to developed countries lang, hindi talaga nagtitrickle down to developing and even less developed countries. FDI continues to be mainly in the advanced industrial economies and not in less developed countries. And lastly, the global trade daw continues to involve mainly the European, Japanese, and North American countries. Okay, so right now, kailangan natin isali yung emerging Asian economies. It is not truly global that continues to involve mainly these particular countries. So, in other words, it is not truly global daw yung nangyayari ngayon because it's only exclusive to the European countries or the Western countries with the addition of the growing what do you call this, Asian economies. Okay? Which siguro kung isipin rin natin, which are actually very true, 'di ba? Kasi yun na nga, kaya nga may basis kasi yung pagsasabi natin na the rich becomes richer, the poor becomes poorer. Nagkakaroon ng sobrang laking gap between these developed and less developed countries. And that is siguro that is the consequence of the policies, economic policies na pinapatupad sa atin ng developed countries na hindi tayo maka-keep up, di ba? So, parang, no, parang it defeats the purpose of opening up economy, di ba? Kasi yung nagbe-benefit lang are the developed countries, ang Europe, ang Japan, ang North America, ang China, ganyan-ganyan. Tayo, utang tayo ng utang, di ba? Walang bayaran. Utang tayo ng utang. So, nalulugmok tayo sa utang, lugmok, 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 that results to our dependency to these developed nations, di ba? So, on one side, di ba? Kasi we can look at this in two ways. So, on one lens or on one way of looking at it, it involves these particular arguments na hindi nagte-trickle down talaga yung benefits, yung investments ng economic ng globalization rather, kasi yung economic globalization daw yung mismo yung myth eh. On the other hand, what trickles down are actually the impacts, especially the negative impacts of globalization, di ba? So, dito sa side na ito, ang sabi, hindi nagte-trickle down yung investments or yung magagandang supposed income na pinapromise ng globalization. On this side naman, ang nagte-trickle down is yung mga negative impacts. So, ang nagte-trickle down is yung poverty, ang nagte-trickle down is yung utang, ganyan-ganyan, yung environmental problems. Because no matter how, di ba, as I've told you, no matter how disconnected we are with the rest of the world, wala tayong magagawa because we are less developed countries, we belong to the southern portion of the world. So, ang nangyayari sa atin bumabagsak yung mga masasamang effects or mga negative effects ng globalization. So no matter how much we say na economic globalization is just a myth because ang nagbe-benefit lang ay yung mga developed countries, we cannot deny that economic globalization is also very real in the sense na sa atin tinatapon yung mga negative impacts ng globalization. And that ends the discussion for chapter 3.